My name is Vladimir Velikov, and I'm a senior engineer in the vSphere client SDK and plugins team at VMware.
And my name is Vladimir Markov, but everybody calls me Stan. And I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Runecast, and also VCDX number 74.
That's quite early.
Thank you.
All right, usual disclaimer. So when we're talking about vSphere, there's one central figure, and that's you, the VI admin. And in the course of the last few years, we've been asking you what are the problems you see managing your infrastructure. And two of the most common problems we saw in the field were how do I manage my third-party solutions integrated with vSphere? I'm getting into problems with that. And the other one is how do I improve the stability and performance of my system, because it's not always as stable as I want it to be. So when you get into an issue, so what's the first thing that you're going to do? Well, call customer support. If you are as nerdy as me and you are in the office at midnight doing something very important, probably this is the last thing you want to do, talk to other people. No. So maybe search through the web, some KBs, some cool blogs. You might find something related to your problem. You might find even very good explanations about how things work. But in many cases, these will not exactly describe the problem you're having. So you are still partially in the dark. And then, of course, you fall back to your good old friends, the logs, which are not too friendly at all at times. And after 1,000 lines of logs and 10 different traces which push you in directions which are not really related to your problem, you are wondering, isn't there a better way? Well, there is a better way, and we are doing it together, VMware and Runecast.
Yeah, this is what we're going to show in this session. Some awesome new features for plugin management and troubleshooting, but also we'll demonstrate also Runecast, how it integrates with the vCenter web client, and also what kind of functionality it brings to help you troubleshoot your environment. First of all, let me just ask, who here has heard or used Runecast Analyzer? If you could raise your hand. Okay, it's about half of you, great. We've been on the Solutions Exchange floor for 4th year. So let me just briefly explain what Runecast is. First of all, before we decided to create Runecast Analyzer, we all used to work as vSphere admins. For many, many years, we were firefighting a lot of different issues. And over 90% of those times, we had to resort back to the VMware knowledge base or some other online sources that described that this is already a known issue, and we could have avoided it if we knew about it. So that's when we realized that there's so much information out there, which is in human-readable format, that can be automated, so that you can automatically discover proactively those risks in your environment before they cause outages or some security breaches. So that's when we created Runecast Analyzer 4 years ago. It automates these sources of truth, as we call them. This is the VMware knowledge base, the VMware hardware compatibility list, best practices in white papers, and documentation. We even look at blogs and social media, because sometimes issues are first documented by some blogger before they're actually recognized and documented by the vendor. So that's really important as well. And last but not least, we also automate the VMware security hardening guides and also security compliance standards like DISA-STIG, PCI DSS, and HIPAA. All that information is translated into machine-readable rules that are used by our patent-pending rules engine to analyze vSphere, vSAN, NSX, and Horizon, the configuration and the logs, and discover those potential risks before they cause some major problems. Now, I think we designed a really beautiful UI, but the reality is that VMware admins were using the web client every single day. So it was really important for us to develop a web client plugin. So to bring all that information into the interface that you're using every single day. So that's what we're going to cover first. We'll see how we can first install and operate with the plugin.
Right, let's have a walkthrough of the plugin lifecycle. At the bottom, you see the vCenter. At the top, the vSphere client. Normally, vSphere client is part of vCenter, but for our purposes, we consider it as a separate actor here because essentially it can be running on another vCenter. If you're in link mode, it can be even running on your local machine. And we have a third-party solution installer. This might be some kind of script or UI where that upon execution would register a vCenter server extension with the plugin deliverable. So when the user logs in, the vSphere client will request all registered plugins with the vCenter and download, unzip, and cache them. Of course, here are some compatibility checks because the plugin might specify its compatibility matrix, or you as an administrator might have blacklisted or whitelisted it. So as long as it's compatible, its bundles are deployed in the vSphere client application server, and the plugin is shown on the UI. So that's more or less the main workflow the plugins go through. Some people are not aware of that, and that's why we've been working on improving how this is visible in the client. So let's jump to the demo.
Yeah, let's see how this works in practice, and we will see actually what kind of tasks are created when I deploy now the plugin, how the UI changes, the different elements in your web clients once the Runecast plugin is deployed. And then we'll see how it's updated. It's a pretty similar process, and we'll review also the vCenter tasks. So we can switch to the demo. Yeah. All right. This is the Runecast Analyzer main dashboard. Now we will take a look into it a little bit more later on in the presentation. But for as a start, let me go to Settings. This is where I normally configure the connection to my endpoints, vCenters, NSX managers, Horizon connection servers. So first of all, Runecast Analyzer comes as a virtual appliance. It's 1 gig OVA deployed on-prem. It has full offline capabilities. Once you deploy it, set up the IP address, shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. You'll get this interface, and you can connect to your vCenters. I already did that. But now I will choose one of the vCenters where, let me select this one here, where plugin is not installed. This was the other appliance where plugins were already installed. So here I see the third one. A plugin is not installed on this vCenter, Polaris Outer Space. So I can just click Install Plugin. Of course, if you have a different software and not Runecast, it will look a little bit different, but there will be some similarities. All right. It will describe what I need to do after the installation. So once I deploy the plugin, I have to configure it. I have to connect it to Runecast Analyzer and generate API token. But let's initiate registering the extension. All right. It's as easy as that. It's already done. Then I'm just going to log in to this vCenter, to the web client, so that it can also do the download and deployment of the zip. So let's take a look at the tasks just to see what's happening. And we see that the plugin was downloaded successfully completed, and deployment was successfully completed as well. Right? And I can refresh the browser also because it tells me that the Runecast plugin has been successfully deployed. So I can refresh the browser to enable it. All right, so here we see now Runecast listed in my home menu. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I will configure it. All right, so I will go to Settings, and I have to connect it to Runecast Analyzer instance. So I need the IP or FQDN and also the API access token. So let's take it from here. I'll connect it to this one. Runecast demo 3. Okay, and API token can be generated over here, so it can authenticate. Just for the test purposes, I will generate it with 1-day expiration. I will copy the token and will paste it into the settings for the plugin. Okay, connection successful. And we can see the plugin also appearing in the client plugins now. On top here, it's enabled and deployed.
And this is a pretty standard way that different partners do this installation process and registration. So that's definitely a best practice.
Mm-hmm. And let's take a look at how the interface changes once I have Runecast Analyzer deployed and this plugin. So let's see what's different. Well, here I have a new widget, which is pretty cool because it shows me for this particular object, in this case a host, what kind of issues are detected. How many violations of best practices, security hardening guidelines, or issues coming from the knowledge base are detected on that particular object. I will have this widget on every object I click on the left-hand inventory. It is also interactive, so if I click on the 79 security hardening issues, it will bring me to the Monitor tab, and you can notice here that there is a section Runecast Analyzer, and it will bring me specifically to the security hardening issues. So for example, I can see here that I have incorrect security issues like password complexity is not set up as it should be, or MAC address changes, for example, is set to accept where it should be set to reject. Always when I expand the particular issue, I can also see what particularly the affected objects are. In this case, I have a few port groups where MAC address changes is set to accept, where the policy is that it should be set to reject. Before we move on, also one cool thing to show, because this is the latest version of the plugin. So naturally, it also supports the dark theme. And also the widget, I think, looks pretty cool in the dark theme. And I believe all other vendors probably they are, I don't know if they're required or they will pretty much do the dark theme as well.
They want to do it because nobody wants to see when they switch to the dark mode to see one white portlet in the summary page. Yeah. So it's mostly driven by customers, and all partners really want to follow suit. Yeah. The API has been released in 6.7 update 1, and all partners jumped on it immediately.
Yeah. And the other thing maybe to mention, I think you'll mention it later in the presentation, but all these tasks that I was showing, they're pretty much available or to such detail since update 2?
Correct. That's the plugin management UI feature.
Okay.
6.7 update 2 and 6.7 update 3, which is out for about a week now, has some improvements in that regard. Yeah.
And I mean, to some of you that didn't fight with plugin installation before, this might not seem that significant, but for us it's great. Also as a vendor that's providing a plugin, because sometimes there are issues with deploying the plugin, so it's great to have this transparency and visibility. All right, I think we can switch over to the plugin update. So I just recorded a GIF here just to demonstrate that if you have an outdated plugin, it will show also in the Runecast Analyzer interface. Then you can just select Update Plugin. And it will go to a very similar procedure like the initial installation. And it will also show the tasks appearing in the web client itself. Once you log in, and also the message that you can refresh your browser.
Cool. So let's see what common plugin issues there are. If we have a look at the same diagram, so a plugin might fail already at the registration step if something in the API was incompatible, or there is a problem in the installer, or it might be registered but not downloaded. For example, the thumbprint was wrong, or on this URL there is nothing to download. If it's downloaded successfully, it might not be compatible. It might not claim compatibility in the first place. But as long as it's compatible, all the bundles, when we're deploying all bundles, there can be all kinds of dependency or runtime issues by the plugin. So as long as that's fine, then we see the UI. So these different sets of problems require different attention in different root causing experience. So in order to increase the visibility, we introduced plugin management UI. So this is the first part. Stan already showed it, so I won't talk too much about that. But essentially, you can just click on the failure or incompatibility and see the exact error and a stack trace if there is such. And the same is also available through the tasks. Essentially, you are able to track the download plugin task, the deploy plugin task, and if anything failed in the task details, you can find more information about that. And the stack traces are especially important when something unknown happened or something that originated from the plugin, so the client cannot really categorize that. And when we're talking about categorization, those are the 4 different categories which map of errors, which map to what we saw earlier. Essentially, when it comes to downloading, the vSphere client doesn't support HTTP-only download by default. So if the URL used HTTP, it's going to fail. Thumbprint or URL is unreachable. With regards to packaging, that's usually a bug on the vendor side or in the client. And it's that some artifact is missing that's expected. Compatibility, there are 2 types. It might be incompatible because the plugin says so. I don't support this version of vSphere, or it might be blacklisted. And with regards to deployment, those are mostly general errors. Now, in order to remediate issues, we've implemented a number of features in the course of 6.5 and 6.7 releases. So probably you remember Flash clients loading experience. We really hope you will soon forget it. Essentially part of the login slowness was a result of the sequential deployment of plugins, so the UI would not show up until all plugins are downloaded and deployed. And I can tell you there are plugins which are 100 megabytes. So yeah, it didn't work too well. For that reason, we implemented async plugin deployment in the HTML client from the get-go. And essentially, you see the UI very quickly. It's, of course, a lot faster. You can manage your infrastructure whenever there is a plugin deployed. It happens behind the scenes. You would see this notification. You just reload the browser, and you can make use of the plugin if you want. But you don't have to wait. So the second one is blacklisting. If plugin is misbehaving, you can just blacklist it through the compatibility matrix XML. But by far the best feature, in my opinion, that was implemented in the HTML client is the sandboxing. So there were countless would break each other on the grounds of a common dependency. So they would both depend on the same library, they would both deliver it, but a different version. So the one who gets deployed first wins. And the other one would search for a class and it would not be there. And sandboxing allows plugins to be deployed in a separate dependency scope so that they can consume their own dependencies. And this basically removed about 80% of the SRs we are having with regards to plugins. And it also removed lots of SRs on our partner side. Then we have some more extension categories so that if something is slow, you are now aware what plugin exactly is slow. If there is a very general naming of a particular item, then you might wonder, well, why is this item loading for so long, and who owns this? Now there's always a category that shows you this plugin, this extension belongs to this plugin. And of course, we've been receiving lots of feedback, and thank you all for that. You can use the top right smiley face in the client to give us feedback. It definitely changes the way things are being engineered. I can tell you that from experience. So let's hear more about Runecast.
Yeah. So great new stuff on managing and troubleshooting plugins. Now let's take a look at troubleshooting your VMware environment as a whole. So Runecast Analyzer, as mentioned already, it's an appliance, 1 gig, download, deploy it, set up the IP address, connect it to your vCenters, NSX managers, Horizon connection servers, whatever products you have in your environment. You just need one single virtual machine. So we have, for example, a customer with 12,000 ESXi hosts. They're using just one single Runecast Analyzer instance to manage all of that. Everything is within that appliance, the rules engine, all the rules. So you don't actually need internet connectivity for this to work. It doesn't upload anything over to the internet. But Runecast Analyzer, of course, it's good to be updated from time to time because there are new issues that are being documented. There are changes to the HCL. Of course, we release new features as well. So you have two ways of doing an update. You can either connect your appliance to the internet via proxy, or you can use the offline update option, which basically allows you to download an ISO file from your profile on runecast.com, attach it to the virtual machine, and perform the update this way. What kind of rules we have? Well, we have internal platform that uses NLP, and also our team is involved to create those rules. But as mentioned earlier, issues from the VMware knowledge base, security standards, PCI DSS, HIPAA, DISA-STIG, social media, blog articles, forums, white papers, best practices, and the latest, the hardware compatibility list. So on the next one, I just want to go back to the demo to show you practically what kind of issues you can discover, so how Runecast can be helpful for you to do next-gen troubleshooting on your VMware environment. All right, let's choose this Runecast Analyzer right here. So going back to the main dashboard, this is what you're going to see after you connect to all the endpoints in your environment and you trigger the initial configuration analysis. The analysis can be done, you can schedule it to run, for example, every hour or every day, or you can trigger it manually by clicking Analyze Now. Runecast does configuration analysis and also log analysis. So it acts as a syslog server. Your ESXi host can send their logs over to Runecast Analyzer for analysis, and that works in real time. So always on the main dashboard, you will see how many critical, major, medium issues are detected, how many issues were found in the logs, in the configuration, level of security compliance, and level of best practice adoption. All the history of the configuration log scans is kept as well for a minimum of 365 days, especially for the configuration scans. So you can see all the trends. You can even go back in time, see what changed in your configuration, see what issues were introduced, what kind of issues were resolved. You can also, when it comes to security compliance in particular, you have a great out-of-the-box evidence whether you have been security compliant or not, for example, for the past year. Imagine you have to be PCI DSS compliant. You can just go here to all issues and select a specific time frame. You can also choose PCI DSS in particular, and you have all the data that you need, whether you have been compliant or not, and what kind of incompliances you've had at any given time. You can also export all of that in CSV and PDF if you want to have it also with this graph. And let's take a look actually at one of the issues that were detected. So this is setting up password policies. Always in details, you can see more information about the problem that was detected. In this case, it's a PCI DSS compliance problem, which relates to specific security control and requirement from the PCI DSS standard. So this is where you have the section from the PCI DSS Council that describes that security control and requirement. And in technical specification, you have a justification why this technical check maps to this particular PCI DSS control and requirement, which is again what auditors are looking for. They don't want to know specifically how you're technically configured your environment, but are you really compliant with that document I have here, which is a little bit vague. It doesn't mention specifically maybe some VMware settings. So you get all of that mapping, all of that useful information out of the box here. In fact, what you can do, first let me show the findings. Yeah, so here you can see also which objects, in this case a host, with a specific version, and the password quality control value is not compliant to what is recommended. But you can actually even customize that. So if you, we recommend all these values, so it's recommended to just run Runecast out of the box without even additional configuration. But if you wish to customize some of those values, you can add a custom value. I want my password policy to be set to this particular string for that cluster. If that's what you want, you can do it here. So you can add custom value, you can select vCenter, cluster, or individual host, and you can start monitoring that group of objects for that specific value.
Is that possible to do with any of the?
So it's not possible with 100% of them. I will show you how you can filter out the customizable ones. So if you just select customizable from here. So this is something we introduced just recently, just a few weeks ago. So we started with PCI DSS. This came from specifically a customer request. So we created a lot of customizable checks, or we made them customizable. So they were there before, we just made them customizable. So all of these here are customizable.
Do you plan to roll out things like the VMware guidelines?
Yes, a lot of these, like you may notice, for example, syslog configuration, NTP, they're the same like in the VMware guidelines, right? Because PCI DSS essentially, from a technical point of view, it covers one of the things written in PCI DSS is that you have to follow the vendor guidelines for security. So I would say that the VMware security guidelines are a subset of everything that PCI DSS covers. All right, let's take a look at hardware compatibility. So that's another thing that we haven't shifted yet to the plugin, one information. So if you remember in the plugin, in your web client, you could see best practices, security hardening guidelines, and KBs. This is one of the things we're planning to shift to the plugin as well. But this functionality has been really impressing people in the last few weeks because it really solves a big problem for VMware admins. So this goes really deep into the configuration of your ESXi hosts, I/O devices that are used for vSAN, and looks into server models, I/O device models, drivers, firmwares, BIOS levels, and it compares all that information to what's written in the hardware compatibility list and determines whether you're fully compatible or not. Let's take a look at this example. I have some red here, so which means that I have some incompatibility. So I have a Dell server, PowerEdge R730. It's on HCL. It's even compatible with 6.5, the current version that's installed there. But the problem is that the BIOS is not compatible. And here I have always a list of supported BIOSes that can serve so that I can change the BIOS version. And by the way, something really useful is we always include the link to the specific server model. So just click on the HCL Online, and it will open up the information, the page on the HCL for that server model. Same with the I/O devices. So I see some red on the I/O devices. Let's see what it is. So the driver firmware combination for this particular I/O device is not compatible with the specific ESXi release. Although it's not such a big problem because I could just update the firmware or the driver to make it compatible. But here I also have a link to the specific page for that particular I/O device on the HCL if you want to see more detailed information directly from VMware, from the vendor. And we don't stop there because this is the current information and compatibility landscape in your environment. But what if you want to do an upgrade? You can simulate it. If I just switch this toggle here, ESXi compatibility simulation, I can decide to go, for example, to 6.7 update 3, click simulate. It will take just a few seconds, and it will show me whether I'll be fully compatible or not if I were to decide to upgrade to that version, which can really save you a lot of troubles and a lot of time to investigate. Something that we added just last week is also vSAN HCL analysis. So I/O devices, for example, this particular I/O device shows green in I/O devices because it's compatible, it's firmware and driver for that ESXi release, but it is not in the vSAN HCL. So if we take a look at it, the firmware of this particular I/O device is not on the vSAN HCL, so it's not fully compatible for that version of vSAN. All right, of course, all of this can be exported in CSV, so if you want to have a big spreadsheet with all your drivers, firmwares, and you want to operate with it after that, you can simply click on Export here on the top right corner. All right, one other thing that you can see only in this web interface that we will shift over to the plugin later on is the log analysis bit. As mentioned, Runecast Analyzer acts as a syslog server, so it receives the logs from the ESXi host, and instead of you having to browse and search through the logs, it automatically searches for problematic log patterns that link back to an issue described usually in the knowledge base. So instead of having thousands of dashboards where you have to know what you're searching for, Runecast will search for exactly what you need. Do I have a problem? What is the root cause? And how do I solve it? Under findings, you can see the log entries, from which host they came at what specific time. And in details, it tells you, here is the problem that you're having, and this is the solution. All right, there's tons of other things that you can see in Runecast Analyzer. For example, you can browse through the logs with the log inspector and so on. But I encourage you to try it on your own and explore the different functionalities. All right, so to summarize what Runecast helps you with. So proactively, you are able to avoid outages and security breaches. So it will tell you before you have, for example, purple screen of death, that you have the conditions of that some of your hosts might crash with PSOD. There's tons of knowledge base articles that talk about that. You can automate security compliance, and you have historical reports as well. So you have all the historical data of your security compliance posture. And something I didn't show you, we have some auto-remediation as well. The analyzer will give you the information and also recommend the remediation. If you want to automatically remediate, we created vRealize Orchestrator plugin, which has out-of-the-box auto-remediation workflows for security auto-remediation. You just press a button, select the issues you want to remediate that are related to security hardening guidelines or PCI DSS. It will use the Runecast REST API to collect all the information about affected objects and detected issues. You can select all of them or just part of them, and then the workflow will automatically do the remediation for you. So this can save you a lot of time as well. Best practice optimization, this is also really important. I didn't focus much on it, but we implemented tons of best practices for vSphere, vSAN, NSX, Horizon, and you can always be sure to be aligned with best practices at any given time. We just don't blindly implement best practices from everywhere. We have a team of experts, VCDX, VCIX, V experts, so we vet all the best practices before actually including them in the product. And last but not least, you can ensure current and future compatibility with the HCL analysis, which is really important. We received a lot of feedback from many customers that some of the most serious issues they've had was because of some incompatibility of a driver and firmware. And they discovered only after days or weeks of troubleshooting. And what saves a lot of time, as mentioned already, is the upgrade simulations that let you see the future, whether you'll be fully compatible or not.
Actually, I got some questions from internal VMware people who are like, hey, why don't we have these things that Runecast is developing?
Well, now it's in the web client anyway. So, and I think that VMware is also advancing in some stages. For example, there's the vSAN Health is showing some information, vCenter Health as well. But of course, if you want to have nearly 2,000 rules and both configuration log analysis to such level that I showed you, you need Runecast Analyzer. What's coming up next? So this is just some of the things that we're planning within the next few months. First of all, enhancing the customization and remediation. As mentioned, just PCI DSS checks are currently customizable. And we're going to continue to make more and more checks customizable so you can really have this control and power in your environment to really truly customize it. By the way, one thing I didn't show is the filtering functionality. So we have very granular filters. You can disable any check on any portion of your environment. So if you want specific KB or group of KBs or security checks on a cluster, host, virtual machine, you can create filters and disable those. But customizing the parameters actually in the checks is also really important, and we'll be extending that even more. We'll be enhancing the remediation capabilities with vRealize Orchestrator, but we're planning to do it also in product as well. And we'll be adding more security compliance profiles. So we covered PCI DSS, DSSTIC, HIPAA. We're planning NIST, BSI, and others. And also enhanced reporting. So we already run on VMware on-prem. Runecast Analyzer has been also certified on VMware Cloud on AWS since the very beginning of VMC on AWS. We are currently developing, and that's something that I haven't mentioned much publicly, is that we're currently developing native AWS integration, which will complete the picture. You'll have Runecast Analyzer and discovering proactively issues for VMware on-prem, for VMC on AWS, and now also for native AWS. We're partnering with different hardware vendors for tighter integration, and also some integrations with SAP HANA are in the works. And naturally, we want to enhance also the UI plugin, so all that information to bring it as much as possible in your day-to-day interface. So first of all, we'll bring log analysis to the plugin, the HCL data that I just showed you, and also some auto-remediation capabilities as well. And now this one is really important, and that's something Vladimir will cover a little bit later in detail, is we are planning to move to a remote plugin architecture. This will enable us, first of all, to be available as a plugin in VMware Cloud on AWS. Currently, it's a local plugin, not remote. So it's available only for the on-prem vCenters that you have. This will really help enhance the plugin capabilities and will help us push out new features and new data into the plugin without having to recode everything. So let's maybe talk a little bit more about a different type of architecture.
Yeah, let's compare what a local and what a remote plugin is, essentially. So in the middle, you have the vCenter with its reverse proxy, the top, the browser where the UI is shown, and at the bottom, you have two backend appliances. So with local plugins, you would have, as you saw earlier, an installer that would register an extension, and essentially the backend appliance would deploy Java middle tier into the vCenter server, and when the user logs in, the UI will be served from this middle tier. And in the other direction, the UI would talk to its backend through the Java service. Now, remote plugins change this picture in the following way. You still register a vCenter extension, but this time this is just a manifest explaining this plugin extends the VM with new menu action or something like that. So this is very simple. And then the UI is served directly from the backend appliance. And the UI piece is talking to its backend through the reverse proxy of the vCenter. Now, this Java middle tier was initially designed to be this thin layer of proxy. Some partners did follow the best practices, others didn't. So some folks will have a bit of difficulties to migrate to remote plugins, but generally it's pretty easy process, and we have tools developed to help them. But looking at this, it doesn't look like the change is significant, but it is very important, especially in the context of the hybrid cloud. So having executable bits inside the vCenter is a stability problem for VMware Cloud on AWS. In addition to that, vCenter upgrade, if there are third-party bits in the vCenter upgrade depends on these solutions. So you have to upgrade all these solutions first, and then you upgrade vCenter. With remote plugins, this is not necessary. So in VMware Cloud on AWS, which would and currently updates quite frequently, doesn't have to wait for all the partners to catch up. So this is a side-by-side comparison. I already covered some of these, but what is very important for both partners and admins is what we call the multi-version, multi-instance support. So this is a huge benefit in the hybrid cloud. So you have a vCenter 6.0 on the left, vCenter 6.7 on the right. And in the middle, I'm not announcing a new version of vCenter. This is some imaginary version 5 years from now. So you can guess how many APIs have changed in the course of these versions. With each vCenter, we have a backend appliance. And now, with local plugins, how would this work? There can be only one plugin deployed in the client. So we would just pick the latest one because it has a chance to talk all these APIs to all these backends and vCenters. In practice, though, it is very difficult for partners to comply with such a requirement, and those requirements are growing and growing with each release. So normally, everyone cuts back on their compatibility matrix. So we support 2 versions of vSphere back or 3 versions of vSphere back. How many do you support?
We have, so since 6.0, so the product supports from 5.0 above, but the plugin from 6.0 above.
Right. Now, obviously, in the hybrid cloud, this becomes a lot more complicated because you have a much faster release cadence. So the remote plugins change the game. You have separate UI parts delivered from each of the backend servers. So essentially, when this is link mode, obviously, when you log into any of the vSphere clients and you select an object or a VM, for example, from vCenter 6.0, you would get the extensions of the plugin which is connected to this particular vCenter. So for 6.0, you would get the line plugin extension. And for vCenter 6.7, if you select the host that belongs to this vCenter, you would get the extension from the blue one. And in the other direction, they're talking to their respective backend servers. So essentially, plugins are now converging to a thing of the vCenter, to pure vCenter extensions only for this particular vCenter. They don't need to know about the others. And this is very important when we're talking about troubleshooting, because with local plugins, you get all kinds of compatibility errors. So people just don't support certain configurations. With remote plugins, that's not the case. And if some 5 more years pass and you have vCenter 12.0, you can link it to this environment and the old stuff will continue to work. So you can just link a new vCenter, deploy the latest and greatest Runecast plugin, and you have them all working together. Now, let's have a look at HLM a little bit. So we have vCenters 1, 2, and 3. They are not linked at the moment. So each of the, so when you log into the client, you see only the respective vCenter and the plugins registered with that. I think this is not visible too well. So we have an L1, which is one local plugin registered with 2 different versions with vCenter 1 and vCenter 2. We have L2, which is registered only with vCenter 2, and 3 different versions of a remote plugin. Now, if we enhance this picture and establish enhanced link mode, the client as a single pane of glass would show all the vCenters and all their inventories. If you select an object of the first vCenter, you will see only L1 and R1. So as L2 is not registered with the first vCenter, you will not see extensions from there. But L1 will be populated with the latest version of the through the whole environment. So L1 1.1 is registered with vCenter 2, but it will show up on objects on vCenter 1 because it's the highest version of a local plugin. And with remote plugins, it's a lot easier because each version shows up for its respective vCenter. And now you might be going like, okay, but this is just TLM. When we talk hybrid, things are a lot more complicated. You have those separate SSO domains and so on. So let's just add those. First 2 belong to one SSO domain. The third one is on the other SSO domain. So you have private cloud on the left, public cloud on the right, and we establish hybrid link mode. So the question now is, what changes in the picture? And the short answer is nothing changes. Given that plugins are now, remote plugins are now pure vCenter extensions, they are abstracted out of the complexity of SSO domains. So essentially you have a very consistent behavior cross clouds. Now, this is a bit of a simplified picture. In real world, from the on-prem VCs, there will be one which is considered the gateway, which is able to see the public cloud. But for our purposes, this is how things look like, and this is how we ensure consistency of the plugin ecosystem and the future of plugins in general. So, Stan, you're planning to build a remote plugin, I hope?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's one of the priorities. I mean, as mentioned previously, giving that capability for VMC on AWS as well is really important. But also, we are introducing a lot of features in the product all the time. So it will make it also easier for us to bring all of those into the web client plugin if it's in remote architecture.
Right. So there is a bit of difference in how VMware handled the migration from Flash to H5 compared to what we are going to do with and what we are doing with migration from local to remote architecture. So given that everybody hated the Flash client, we really pushed quite aggressively our partners to move to H5. Which they did. Of course, they didn't like the short time that they had to plan for that, given they had just built their Flash plugins. But they did it. Now, with this migration to remote plugins, we are not aggressive at all. So with the next major release, we are supporting both architectures. Currently, we are supporting both architectures. So remote plugin architecture was released in 6.7 update 1. And we will continue to support both architectures. We have some quite cool plugins, as we saw today. So for supporting 6.0, 6.5, then you continue to use the local plugin, and whenever partners are ready, they'll switch to remote plugin architecture. And I believe there are enough reasons for that. And main reason is hybrid cloud. On the public cloud, on the VMware cloud on AWS, there will be only remote plugins.
Yep, I think it's time to open it for questions.
Yeah, and please fill out the survey to give us feedback.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Questions? Well, if you have questions in the future, we are quite active on the community. Just get in contact with us, mail us. We appreciate any questions so that we can develop further.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining today.